Hi everyone, it's Emily Herring, Marshall County Conservation Naturalist, and today's video is going to be about birds. We've already talked a little bit about mammals as well as amphibians, so I thought we'd move on to a different group of animals, and that is birds. So birds are around all year round, whether it's snowing, cold, or if it's hot and the middle of summer. And learning about birds is a really fun activity. Going birding is great because you can do it anywhere you're at, and it's a good way to help beat boredom. So if you're bored, you can easily go outside and go birding. At the end of this program, I'll make sure to include a list of all the different birds that you can find in Iowa so you can create your own life list. And what a life list is a list of all the birds that you can find in Iowa. I'll put the Iowa one up, and you can check them off as you find them. There's over 300 species of birds here in Iowa, and so it's a great challenge to be able to find all those different birds that live here and call Iowa home. So before we get to talking about different types of birds and how to identify them, it's important that we're able to know what a bird is. So we're going to talk about the characteristics of birds. Now, the first thing that comes to mind is birds have wings. Yes, all birds have wings. Not all birds use their wings to fly, but all birds have wings. Some birds, like penguins, use their wings to be able to swim. And some birds that don't fly, like ostriches, actually use their wings for balance. But all birds have wings, and those wings are covered in feathers. Now, feathers have lots of important jobs for a bird. You and I, as mammals, we're covered in hair, but birds are actually covered in feathers. And there's different forms of feathers, and like I said, they have different jobs that they have to do. So one of the first things I think of when I think of feathers is that I think that they help keep birds warm and dry. In fact, lots of times birds have oil glands on their bodies that actually allow them to be able to coat their feathers in oil to make them weather resistant or water resistant. So the feathers help to keep the water off of them. It helps to layer. You think of a down coat or a down sleeping bag that you might have. Those are layers of feathers that help to keep you warm, and it works the exact same way on a bird. How that works is there's layers upon layers of feathers, and in between those feathers is air, and that air, if it's warm, traps in and insulates the body. So just like it insulates us in the wintertime, a bird's feathers help to keep them warm as well. So unlike wearing coats and rain jackets like you and me, birds have their feathers to help protect them. If you've ever seen a bird all fluffed up in the wintertime, that's what they're doing. They're trying to create layers of air in between their feathers to help keep them warm. So feathers are a characteristic, and one of the things those feathers do is they help keep them warm. Now, lots of times, birds also have feathers that help them to be able to camouflage or blend in. So birds can blend in, some birds can blend in really well. I'm going to put up a picture, and I want you to tell me, how many birds do you see in this picture? If you guessed 2, you are correct. Now, this camouflage helps birds to be able to survive because oftentimes they are prey. And so that camouflage helps them to be able to blend in and hide from predators. Sometimes, though, camouflage also helps if they're predators. For example, owls are considered predators, and they are camouflage in color, and that helps them to be able to hide from their prey. So camouflage can work both ways when it comes to birds and animals. So they're camouflaged. It helps to keep them warm and dry, and it helps them to attract a mate. I think the best example of this is the peacock, because it's one of the most showy birds that I can think of, with their big tail feathers and when they shake them, and their bright, beautiful blue colors. Now, those bright colors are often found on the males and not the females. The females are often usually more subdued and colored, and so those bright colors help them to be able to attract a mate. Another benefit of the females being kind of more dull in color is it allows them to be able to sit on a nest and protect their young and not stand out for predators. So many times the females tend to be a little bit more dull in color than the males, and the males tend to be brighter in color to be able to attract a mate. So feathers help birds be able to attract mates as well. Now, we all know that for the most part birds fly, and feathers help them to be able to fly. We talked about how they all have wings. Well, those feathers help the birds to be able to fly as well. And last but not least, bird skin is actually very sensitive, and their feathers work as a way to protect them from the sun. So feathers have lots of purposes, and it's kind of fun when we go out on a hike, and I hope you guys go out hiking and you'll find pretty commonly feathers on the ground. And you can identify feathers by the colors and the markings on them. And so you can look at them up close and you can see that the feather is more than just a feather, that they're made up of lots of little itty bitty parts of a feather. And we'll talk about that in a little bit. Now, they have wings, they are covered in feathers, they're warm-blooded. So just like mammals, they produce their own body heat. So birds are warm-blooded. That means that they can live in cold places, no problem, just like we can, but they don't put on coats. Instead, they have their feathers to help keep them warm. Birds are endothermic, which means that they are warm-blooded and they produce their own body heat. Another interesting thing about birds is that they have hollow bones. When you look at a bird's bones, they are actually hollow. So here I have a pelican bone. This is a bone from a pelican. It is quite light, and that is because it is hollow. When you look in there, you can see that there's bars in there, and we'll talk about those more in a little bit, but birds' bones are quite strong even though they are hollow. Now that lightweight hollowness, or at least partial hollowness, is because it allows them to be able to fly. So birds have hollow bones. Another interesting thing about a bird is that they are oviparous. I used that word in a previous video. If you can remember what that means. Oh yeah, that means that they lay eggs. So many of us know what kind of egg this is. This is an ostrich egg. It is our largest bird. They do not fly because they are so large, but this is an egg from an ostrich. All birds lay eggs because they are oviparous. Now, this is our largest bird egg, and this is our smallest. This is a hummingbird egg. So they say it's about the size of a Tic Tac. So you can see quite a difference in the shapes and sizes of eggs. Now, talking about shapes, some eggs are actually pointy on one end and others are quite round. This is an egg, a replica egg of an eagle's egg, and you can see that it is very round in shape. This is a replica of a killdeer egg. And this is really interesting because the thing about a killdeer's egg, it's pointed like this so it doesn't roll out of the nest. When birds lay their eggs on the ground, they usually have a pointy end, and that is in case it rolls out of the nest, it just rolls back in. Now, on the other hand, when birds have round eggs, they tend to be born in nests. So that way, there's no fear that if the egg rolls out of the nest, that it can roll back all the way down the hill, because if it rolls out of the nest, it's probably not going to survive the fall. So if they're born in nests off the ground, then they are round. So eggs can be pointed, they can be round, big or small, and they can also be different colors. This is a robin's egg, and as most of us know, the robins have pretty blue eggs, but so do blue jays and other birds as well. So they can be anywhere from pink to blues to grays to browns to blacks, splattered, speckled, all different colors, and so eggs really vary depending on the bird that laid them. So all birds have eggs, and eggs take different amounts of times to hatch depending on the type of bird. If birds lay eggs, unless they lay them on the ground like a killdeer, they have to lay the eggs in nests. Different birds make different nests. An eagle's nest, for example, can be the size of a car in a tree, usually close to water, usually a cottonwood along a river's edge. Now, a long time ago, or 20 years ago, bald eagles were very uncommon and their nests are uncommon, but now there are many places you can go and see bald eagle nests in Marshall County. The important thing is to respect the distance of an eagle's nest because we don't want to disturb them or their young. Now, other birds make different nests. For example, you may have seen one of these before hanging in a tree. This is an oriole nest. And they make new ones every single year, and it is a woven nest that hangs from a tree. It's quite amazing when you look at the detail how a bird who can only use their beak and their feet to be able to create such a neat nest for their babies to live in, and then it just naturally rocks in the wind. On the other hand, there's this nest, and this is a little itty bitty nest. It's about the size of a golf ball. Any idea what kind of bird made this nest? If you guessed ruby-throated hummingbird, you are correct. It's really interesting, the material that the ruby-throated hummingbird uses. They actually use cobwebs from spiders to be able to make their nest, and then on the outside of their nest they put lichens. So about the size of a golf ball, pretty hard to find, but a ruby-throated hummingbird. Now some birds use thistle down, some use sticks, some use mud like robins, but all different types of birds use different materials to build nests, and they're all different sizes depending on the birds. Now some birds use hollow trees, and we call them cavity nesters. So just like when you get a cavity in your tooth, a cavity is a hole in your tooth, well, some birds live in holes or nest in holes, and those include some owls as well as woodpeckers. So birds lay eggs in nests, sometimes on the ground, but all birds lay eggs. Now that we've talked about the characteristics of birds, let's talk about some unique features birds have. Okay, let's do a little riddle game. On the side here, you'll see 8 words. Those 8 words are going to be the answer to some riddles I read. So what you should do is grab a piece of paper and number it 1 through 8. Pause the video for a second if you need to go grab that paper and pencil. Now, I'll read the riddle, pick the word you think that matches it, and we'll see if you get them right. Are you ready? Number 1. I'm strong and thick and can really do the trick, especially with a lot of grit. Again, I'm strong and thick and can really do the trick, especially with a lot of grit. That's number 1. Number 2. Millions of barbs on every vein. Without me, winter would be a pain. Millions of barbs on every vein. Without me, winter would be a pain. Number 3. My shape gives birds something really neat, a lift to get them off their feet. My shapes give birds something really neat, a lift to get them off their feet. Number 4. Space inside to keep me light, struts that brace to give me might. Space inside to keep me light, struts that brace to give me might. Number 5. I'm not a friend of water, that's a fact. I'm a big part of the preening act. Again, I'm not a friend of water, that's a fact. I'm a big part of the preening act. Number 6. 2 small holes are the only clues that were inside a bird hidden from view. 2 small holes are the only clues that were inside a bird hidden from view. Number 7. Depending on what a bird might eat, I can double in my size. That's quite a feat. Depending on what a bird might eat, I can double my size. That's quite a feat. And number 8. In some birds, we're found almost everywhere. We're hooked up to lungs and fill up with air. In some birds, we're found almost everywhere. We're hooked up to lungs and fill up with air. All right, let's see how you did. All right, number 1. I'm strong and thick and can really do the trick, especially with a lot of grit. If you guessed gizzard, you are correct. So lots of times birds will eat grit or small rock to help with their digestion. Depending on the size of the bird, some of those pieces of grit can be quite large. Ostriches can swallow rocks the size of golf balls to help with their digestion. And that is because, well, they don't have teeth like you and me. Our digestion starts to take place in our mouth with our teeth and our saliva, and birds don't have that. So instead, they have to have something that helps grind up their food, and that is grit or rocks that goes into their gizzards. So, for example, do a little experiment. Take 2 containers And one of them put rocks and the other one, nothing. Then what you're going to do is you're going to put 3 oyster crackers inside one of the containers, and then 3 oyster crackers inside the other container with rocks. Then I want you to shake them for 15 seconds as hard as you can. Are you ready? Getting tired. Okay, so which one of these, the one without the rocks or the one with rocks, do you think had the crackers more chewed up or broken up? If you guess the one with the rocks, you're correct. In fact, the one without rocks, you can see the oyster crackers are hardly broken at all. However, the one with rocks, the oyster crackers are completely broken. So those rocks inside the digestive system of the gizzard help the birds to be able to chew up their food, blend up their food, grind up their food, and be able to digest it faster. So some birds eat rocks. Now I say some, not all, because if you have a liquid diet like a hummingbird, you do not need to swallow grit because they don't need to have that process of grinding up their food. So for number 1, if you picked gizzard, you are correct. Okay, number 2, millions of barbs on every vein. Without me, winter would be a pain. If you guessed feather, you are correct. And vein and barbs are part of the feather. So we already talked about why feathers are important, but we didn't talk about the parts of the feather. This part here is called the shaft. Oftentimes we sometimes call it the quill as well. And then this part is called the vein. Now the vein is actually made up of lots of little itty bitty feathers, and those are the barbs. And the barbs have hooks on them that hold them together. So those are the parts of the feather. It's the vein, the quill, and then the barbs that hold the feather parts together. So that is feather. So if you guessed feather for number 2, you are correct. All right, number 3. My shape gives birds something really neat, a lift to get them off their feet. If you guessed wing, you are correct. Now this wing is actually from a great horned owl, and I need to do a disclaimer. We actually have permits to have materials like this. Now we didn't go out and kill this owl. More than likely we found it dead on the side of the road after it got hit by a car, or sometimes people find owls that are dead and then they bring them to us and we dispose of them, or we use their parts so they don't go to waste. So this is a great horned owl's wing, and we do have a special permit for it to be able to have it, and it's called a salvage permit because we salvage the remains of the animal. Now these feathers down here are called flight feathers, and these are the coverts. So those are the parts of the wings. So for number 3, if you wrote down wings, you are correct. All right, number 4, space inside to keep me light, struts that brace to give me might. If you guessed a bone, you are correct. So space inside, they're hollow on the inside, but you can see inside there's little bars that go across the bones, and those are called struts, and those struts help give the bone strength. So like we talked about before, birds' bones are hollow to help them be light, to help them to be able to fly. However, they're still strong because they have struts inside that brace the inside of the bone. So number 4 is bone. Number 5, I'm not a friend of water, that's a fact. I'm a big part of the preening act. If you chose oil gland, you are correct. Oftentimes birds have oil glands, sometimes on their backs, that they actually rub their beak across, and then when they preen or clean their feathers, they rub that oil over their feathers, and that helps to make them waterproof. Especially ducks that are in the water a lot, or aquatic ducks, so they actually use that to help keep themselves dry even when they sit on top of the water. So they have a little gland that they rub their beak over, and then they run it through their feathers. And that is called the oil gland, and preening is when they clean their feathers. So number 5 is oil gland. Okay, here's number 6. 2 small holes are the only clues that we're inside a bird hidden from view. Any idea? If you guessed ears, you are correct. Birds don't have cartilage on the outside of their heads like you and me. Instead, they just have holes on the side of their heads. Sometimes their face helps to funnel noise to their ears, like an owl's, but oftentimes they just have holes on their side of the head that the sound comes into. Birds have amazing sense of hearing still, and that helps them to be able to survive and also sometimes to find their prey. So if you guessed ears for number 6, you are correct. All right, number 7. Depending on what a bird might eat, I can double my size. That's quite a feat. If you pick the word crop, you are correct. A crop is a part of a bird's digestive system. Now, some birds don't have them, but most do, and it's located on their chest. In fact, you can tell if a bird has eaten recently if there's a large bump on their crop or on their neck. That means that their food is being stored there before it goes into the digestion process or through the rest of the digestive system. So it's kind of like a to-go container. A bird eats quickly so that way they can get away from the scene and find a safe place to be able to digest their food, and then they sit and they slowly digest their food. Now, some birds like owls don't have crops, but most birds, especially with raptors, it's really obvious when they just ate something because they'll have that big bump on their chest, which shows that their crop is full. So, for number 7, if you chose the word crop, you are correct. Okay, number 8. In some birds, we're found almost everywhere. We're hooked up to lungs and fill up with air. If you chose the word air sac, you are correct. So throughout birds' bodies, they have sacs of air that are attached to their lungs, and then they're attached to other parts of their body, including their hollow bones. And what that does is the lung pulls the air in and into the air sac and then into the body, which helps them to be able to save energy as well as keep themselves light. And so it's an important part of a bird's body. So for number 8, if you chose the word air sacs, you are correct. So this concludes the basics of birds part 1. We've talked about the characteristics and unique things that help birds to be able to survive. We are going to have another video for you talking about how to identify birds, whether it be by their feathers or sounds, as well as how to use binoculars. So look for Birding Basics part 2 in a little bit. Now that we kind of know the basic characteristics of birds, we can learn on how to identify different birds. When we go out and we look at birds, there's some basic things that we look for to be able to say, oh, that's a red-winged blackbird, or ooh, that's a blue jay. And those characteristics are things that you should kind of think about every time you see a bird and you're trying to identify it. If you don't know birds, that's okay. One of the best things you can do is get a good bird book. They usually don't cost all that much money, or you can always check one out from the library. And they're kind of fun to look through and just realize how many different types of birds there are. A good bird book will also tell you where the bird lives, and they'll have maps in there showing the different ranges of the birds. So you'll know if you're actually seeing a ptarmigan in your yard or if it's some other species. These guys live in Alaska, so you probably aren't seeing them. So getting a good bird book is important. Now, these bird books will help you to be able to identify the difference between birds. When you look at a bird, one of the first things you're going to notice is its color and the markings on its feathers, and that is great. There's all different types of markings on birds. Maybe they have a mustache like a flicker, or a throat or a bib like a dick thistle, or a necklace like a meadowlark. So you can identify different birds by certain markings on their bodies, which is really important. In fact, some birds look so much like another bird that you can only identify them by the marks, the bars or the marks or stripes on their tails. So getting a good look at the bird is really, really important. Picking out different markings, whether or not they have an eye stripe or a cap on their head like a black-capped chickadee, will help you to be able to identify them in your book. Other things that you might want to take into consideration is where you're finding them at. So are you finding them at a wetland? Are you finding them in the woods? Are you finding them in town? Because that can also tell you a little bit, and that oftentimes is listed in your bird guide of, oh, this is a wetland species, so you can find it here in a wetland. When you look at the bird, check out their beaks. All different birds have different shaped beaks, and those different shaped beaks can tell you about the bird as well. Sometimes it depends on the color of their beak on what kind of bird it is. So if you found an eagle, this is a replica eagle skull, you can see that it has a nice hooked, sharp beak. If you find this kind of beak on a bird, a sharp hooked beak, you know that it's a raptor. So you could flip to your raptor section of your book to be able to identify it. This beak is made for tearing meat, and so they have to be able to rip apart their meat, and so we know that they are in that raptor section. So you're looking at either an eagle or an owl. You may find a bird that's got a long pointy beak like this and long skinny legs. This is a great blue heron skull. Those long skinny beaks are made to grab or stab fish in the water or frogs and be able to eat them. So a long skinny beak can be another identification. Or maybe they have a beak or a bill like a goose or a duck. And so then you can go to the waterfowl section of your book. So looking at the animals besides just their feathers is important. Another thing you can look at is their feet. Some birds, again, can only be identified by the color of their legs, which is kind of crazy to think about. So it's important when you look at your bird, you're looking at all the parts of the bird. So this is a great blue heron leg, and this is just up to a certain point, and you can see how long and skinny it is and black, and is made to wade in the water. Here I have a replica eagle talon. We call raptors' feet talons because they have sharp claws made for grabbing. So maybe you get a good look at those feet and you see those sharp claws, then you know you have a raptor that you are trying to identify. Webbed feet. If your bird has webbed feet, then more than likely you are looking at some type of waterfowl, ducks, geese, things like that. You can look at the way that a bird's foot or toes are formed. For example, you'll notice that this is forming in an X versus this, which has 3 toes forward and 1 back. This, if you see a bird grabbing onto the side of a tree like this, probably falls in the woodpecker category because they have different toe formations. So this is a foot of a woodpecker. So if you see that a bird's got 2 toes up and 2 toes down, it's climbing up the side of a tree, that's a very good sign that you are looking at a woodpecker. So all different types of birds have different feet. So when you go out to start identifying birds, you can look at the shape of their feet, you can look at the color of their feet, you can look at the shape of the bill, the color of the bill, you look at the feathers, the specific markings on the birds, and that helps you to start to be able to identify different birds. Okay, so we've talked about how to identify birds using their feathers and their markings, or the shape of their beak, or the color of their legs. But another great way to identify birds is by ear, or the calls that they make. Different birds make different calls, and you can identify them that way. Sometimes birds don't make any calls at all, and we'll talk about that too. We'll also talk about how to use binoculars when you go birding. So let's head outside and we'll see what we can find.
Here is a review of the birds that we heard.
So I'm going to just briefly go over how to use binoculars, because if you're going to go out birding, it's important that you know how to use binoculars. You can go birding without binoculars. A lot of birds, if you're quiet and if you sit quietly for a while, will come close enough that you're able to see them with your eyes. But better binoculars are always helpful if you're wanting to get some that tend to stay further away. And you can get all different types of binoculars, and they don't have to be very expensive, but you do want to treat them with care. So one of the first things I always say is, once you get your binoculars, put the strap around your neck. So that way, if you're not thinking about it and you accidentally let them go, that they just fall down to your stomach instead of falling on the ground. Now, these binoculars have a couple of different things. So one of the first things you need to notice is that the binoculars bend closer and farther apart, at least the eyepieces do when you move them. And that is to line up with how far apart your eyes are. So you're going to want to bend those until you see one solid circle in your eye when you look through your binoculars. Okay? So as I look through my binoculars, I'm going to want to also make sure that it is focused. Now, there's a center focus wheel right here on these binoculars, and most binoculars have something in the middle that goes back and forth, and that's what focuses. So what you're going to want to do, and maybe even before you go out into the woods, is select an object that's a little ways away, and you're going to put your eyes up into the binoculars, and you're going to look at that object, and then you're going to focus it. So once you have it focused on something, so I'm choosing a little knot on a tree up ahead of me, I've got one circle that I can see through my eyepieces, and then I've focused it. There is one more thing on these binoculars. Now, not all binoculars have this, but there is one more way to focus on these binoculars, and that's it on this right eyepiece. So sometimes our eyes see differently, and then binoculars will offer you the option to be able to focus one eye over the other, your right eye. So with these, I'm going to actually cover up my left eye or close it, and then I'm going to focus on that object again, and I'm going to spin a little dial that's right below the eyepiece. Now, once I have done that on that one side, I should never have to adjust that again. That is just set now to my eyes, and it should be that way. Now, if someone else borrows your binoculars and resets it, then you probably have to redo it. But otherwise, you can just leave that there. Now, that middle focusing, you will have to adjust that you'll have to adjust that as you look at things, depending on how close or how far away they are. Okay? Now, there's one other thing, and that depends on if you wear glasses or not. Now, if you wear glasses, these actually come up and down. Now, if you wear glasses, you are going to want them down so it is flat against the lens. Okay, just like that. However, if you're like me and don't wear glasses, then you're going to pull those out so there's a little bit of airspace between the edge of the binocular viewer and then down. Okay, so that's pretty much how you use the binoculars, or how do you get them focused for your eyes. Now, one thing that is really helpful, I think, when I use binoculars is that you don't put your eyes and look up at an object, because it's very hard to find an object that is up in the sky or in a tree by looking through your binoculars. Instead, what you're going to commonly do is you are going to keep your binoculars at your chest, and then when you spy an object, so let's say I see a bird over there in that tree, I look at the bird and I bring my binoculars up to my eyes. Oftentimes that gets you at least in the vicinity to be able to find that bird, and it makes it a lot quicker, so that way the bird doesn't disappear before you find it. So just remember to adjust it so it's the right width for your eyes, the center, adjust the focus, and then if you have glasses, that you can put those down so there's no gap. If you don't have glasses, allow there to be an air gap, and then if you have one of these adjusters on the right eye, that you just close your left eye or block that left eye out and adjust that. And then you're ready to go birding.
I hope you enjoyed learning about birds. You will find a link with the Iowa Bird Life List, and I hope you go out and start your life list today. Visit our parks, start with woodlands and go to wetlands, because you will find different birds that live in those parks. If you have any questions, you can always reach out to me at eherring@marshallcountyia.gov. I hope that you get out this spring and find some birds, and I hope that our paths cross soon.